Good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be attending this. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend this session. My name is Frank Dickson, and I am the Program Vice President with the Security and Digital Trust team at IDC. I'm here to spend a little bit of time today to talk to you a little about cloud security, COVID-19, the new normal, and the next normal. So let me jump into it. And so before I go deep into the presentation, I kind of want to set a premise, right? And this is IDC's premise. And so we say constantly, complexity is the enemy of security. And I think as we go through this deck, we're going to hit this theme multiple times, but I really want to make sure that we set this stage up front. And as we address the conversation throughout the next 40 or 50 minutes, that we keep this theme in mind. Now, before we dig really deep into this whole idea of cloud security, let's kind of set our framing, right? Because fundamentally, security is set forth by the drumbeat set by our company CEOs. And so when we look at the directions that companies are going, IDC outlined the CEO's new agenda for running a digital enterprise in 2019, right? And so we conjectured that, companies were looking to make a differentiated impact in 9 core areas. The kind of the future of the reality they want to create with customers and consumers, the future of work, the future of operations, connectedness, digital innovation, industries, digital infrastructure, intelligence, and of course, trust, right? Now, it's one thing, to have a bunch of really insightful people articulate, how we're characterizing what CEOs are going. The better attribute is when you actually validate it. And so this year we validated. So we asked CEOs, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Global CEO, can you confirm that these are your critical agenda items, right? And 53.9% said, customers and consumers were critical in the next 5 years. 62% said that digital innovation was critical. And as you might imagine, 62.5% said, the future of trust was critical going forward. So this whole area of digital transformation is becoming critical to CEOs as they look to make, that differentiated impact with their customers. Now, we joke, right? And we've done, who's leading digital transformation in your organization? Is it the CEO? Is it the CEO? Or is it COVID-19, right? And the joke is somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but there's a little bit of reality here, right? CEOs are looking to make a differentiated impact with digital transformation. But the reality is the COVID-19 pandemic, critically changed digital transformation. It forced us to move forward at a rate that we wouldn't have normally done. This cartoon sort of lends itself, right? We joke that digital transformation was years away, but in reality, the COVID wrecking ball accelerated that. And so as we look at this whole idea of the new normal, right? We took a quote from a CEO from a large German-based global manufacturer, said, hey, we have a workforce with 300,000 employees. Before the crisis, 50,000 of them could work at home. After 1 week, 250,000 of them could, right? And this is indicative of kind of these shifting C-suite priorities, right? Because before COVID, right, we see that digital trust was way on top. Digital infrastructure resiliency, was right up there with it. Way down there at the bottom, right, are things like resilient business operations and customer experience programs and connectivity. Like, how important can connectivity be? Well, some of those things become extremely important in the time of crisis, because we're reminded, right, in a time of crisis, that we need to keep business flowing. We need to keep revenue. And this need to keep operations going, remaining driving revenue, is kind of a core theme as it relates to security and trust, right? Because as we see, the importance in a post-COVID reality is that digital trust drops from, the number 1 priority to 6. Digital infrastructure resiliency drops down to 8. workplace transformation drops down to 9. And so what becomes key? This whole idea of resilient business operations jumps from 7 to 1. Customer experience becomes number 2. Data programs, connectivity, right? Keeping the lights on becomes extremely important in a time of crisis. And this is what beats that drum for security. Now, as it relates to COVID, right? As we look at the economic situation driven by COVID, we go in 5 stages. Now, it's important to note that we're not necessarily defining the length of these stages. They're not all equal. This is just a theoretical model, right? As the machinations of COVID move out and move in, right? These lengths will change, but the order of moving from dealing with the crisis to dealing with the economic slowdown to a probable recession, right? And then after we come out of that recession, you get a return to growth and what we call the next normal. And there's a business focus that is reflected in these stages, right? During the COVID crisis, right? What are we focused on? We're focused on business continuity. During an economic slowdown, it's business optimization. During a recession, we want to be resilient, right? We want to survive that. Then all of a sudden, when we return to growth as an economy, right, we start focusing on making targeted investment, right, so that we can, be that future enterprise. But what we're finding is that CEOs are aggressively using technology to what we call flatten that curve, right? They're not accepting the fact that they have to go all the way down in recession. They are not accepting the fact that they just need to be resilient. They're trying to flatten that out so that that recessionary impact is lessened, and they're making targeted investments early on to be able to leverage this time of crisis to be able to gain an advantage in the marketplace. And we validated this with primary data. So we asked, hey, where are you now, right? And you'll see that 30% said they're in that business continuity phase right now. 23% said they're in that cost optimization. Only 9% say they're driving that future enterprise. But we asked them, right? Where are you going to be in 90 days? That number that's focused on business continuity, less than half are there. And if you look at that future enterprise, more than double are looking to be there, right? Organizations are looking to use technology to flatten that curve, right? And we can see this in some of the data that comes through, right? So, DX has been all about productivity and costs, right? And so what are we seeing? They're trying to drive productivity improvements, cost efficiencies, process cycle time reductions, improve customer acquisition rates, right? Here's a quote from Eli Lilly. We're trying to optimize our operational spend in the company across all areas so that we can direct more of our funding to discover innovative medicines and patents, right? We're looking to create a competitive advantage in the marketplace. But as we move forward to digital transformation, right, we're struck once again as we think about this idea of complexity is the enemy of security, right? Because when we look at digital transformation, we're dealt with new tech buyers, right? 50% of tech spending comes from outside the IT department. These are people that are traditionally unfamiliar or unaware of security, right? They're trying to make a differentiated impact. They're trying to create efficiencies. They're trying to create customers. They're looking for time to market. Security isn't the first thing on their mind. 35% of these new buyers are millennials, right? They're buyers that are born and bred in an era in which customer experience and user experience was key. They're born with iPhones, right? They're not going to accept a suboptimal usage experience in the name of security. And almost a third of CIOs see their role as driving innovation in the business, right? We're looking for results. We're looking to drive a differentiated impact. Security is not going to be allowed to slow these folks down. And as we look at this COVID era and these technologies that see increased adoption, some of these make a ton of sense, right? Video conferencing, no brainer, right? We can't travel anymore. Of course, we're going to use video conferencing. Remote learning, secure connectivity, virtual workspaces, these all make sense. How do we use technology to collaborate? Oh, what's number 5 on there? Cloud computing, data security, secure remote access, right? We're starting to see these platforms that are enabling and need for security. And as we see this cloud-19 accelerating transformations to the third platform, what do we think are going to be the long-term impacts, right? We're going to deploy more mobile devices. We're going to encourage more work at home, right? We're going to implement more agile IT, right? The issue that we work with moving forward here is that nothing's going to change the way it was, right? And so as we see this long-term impacts of the COVID crisis, we're going to note we're moving data and applications to the cloud more aggressively. Your on-premises measures that you use to protect your applications and data aren't going to work anymore as we move everything to the cloud. We're going to have to focus. We're going to have dedicated measures to take care of data and applications in the new reality. Once again, our users and our applications have moved from off-prem and they're moved outside the perimeter, and we have to take care of that. Now, we've seen that cloud's not slowing down, right? So this comes from our IDC trackers that show both the growth of public cloud and private cloud, and we're seeing that the growth isn't slowing down; it's moving forward. And so as we talk to CIOs, we characterize them in kind of 3 buckets in this kind of COVID reality, right? The first is the operational CIO, and that operational CIO has the opportunity to do cost reduction, manage risk, and optimize business operations. A CIO can also be strategic, right? They can orchestrate digital. They can create business agility. They can introduce new product or service enablement, or they can be disruptive, right? They can lead digital. They can create new business model transformations. They can deliver new revenue streams. Now, it's important to note that their vantage point or the view that or the role that the CIO chooses to play has an impact on their decisions. So let's just not make this theoretical. Let's quantify this, right? So what do we say? So we interview CIOs. Before the COVID pandemic, how would you assess where your organization was with respect to digital transformation, right? And you'll see this almost even kind of bell curve, right? From the very bottom, you'll see DX initiatives that were very tactical and disconnected from enterprise strategy, right? And up on the very top, there's a longer term investment plan in place, and the organization strategy is to use DX to transform markets and customers by creating new business models and product service experiences. What if we took this question and this distribution and we assigned names to it, right? Let's make that bottom category the operational folks. And let's make that middle category the strategic folks. And let's make that top category the disruptive folks, right? And so once we characterize them in kind of this topology, let's see how they approach security. And as you might guess, as we ask them, compared with your original, or your organization's original budget IT spending plans in 2020 overall, how do you think your organization's actual spending on security products and services will be affected by COVID? And as you might expect, less than 30% of the operational are looking to increase their spend on security. However, the disruptive, over half are planning to increase their spend on security, right? Those CIOs, they're looking to be disruptive. They're looking to lead. They're looking to shine in this period, are spending more on security in this COVID era or because of this COVID era. Now, that aligns with some of the survey data we see back, right? Because as we ask CIOs, right, which of the following purchase the following technology buying criteria will be the most important in your next technology spending, right? Number two is aligns with our security, privacy, and industry compliance requirements, right? Number two, not very surprising, but as we invest, right, we have some challenges, right? We talked about this. Complexity is the enemy of security, right? And as we ask people, hey, what are your top concerns with public cloud IaaS? The number one concern is security. Number one. And what are you specifically concerned about? Well, there's a ton, right? Data exposure, 47%, malware, 44%, right? Data in transit, how about just accidental corruption, right? The security task it's a hard one. And as we ask, it's not just about security, it's about compliance, right? So we ask, when choosing cloud security software, hardware, and services, how important is it that technologies or service providers provide evidence of some technical security certification, right? 86% view security certification as important or very important, right? It's not just security, it's compliance as well. But we come, as we're looking to apply the security and as we're looking to, address compliance, once again, we're struck with the reality of we in security, we've got some complexity to deal with, right? Because as we ask organizations about their cloud maturity, right, based on self-reporting results, 48% feel that their cloud maturity is in the manage or optimize, which means that 52% consider their environment, the environment that you have to protect, as ad hoc, opportunistic, or marginally repeatable, right? And it kind of makes sense, right? Because we tend to create our own complexity, and that complexity that the cloud people call, we call it multi-cloud, right? Because if you look at the complexity that we create with this multi-cloud, what you'll see is that, as we ask, which cloud providers does your organization currently use, you'll see this mixture of AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, IBM, Oracle Cloud, VMware, right? And it's not just when we ask, which clouds are you in, when we look at our market shares, that's validated by the share, right? We see this spread of cloud environments, right? And as we see this spread of cloud environments, all this relates to complexity, because every one of these environments has different configurations, different tools, and quite often different sets of security tools. We have to help our cloud brethren protect themselves from themselves, right? And this data that we hear about cloud, it is a double-edged sword. There was some really compelling data that we got in our latest Kubernetes study, right? Because as we asked, what are the primary drivers that caused your organization to initially deploy containers and/or Kubernetes, right? It's not surprising that the number one response is improved security, right? The structure that Kubernetes provides a lot of foundation that we can build on for security. However, when we ask, what are your top challenges when deploying containers and/or Kubernetes? Security, right? It's both an advantage and a disadvantage, right? It's a complexity. And it's not like we can just throw people at the problem, right? Because one of the things that we've seen more often than not is there's a scarcity of talented folks, right? So as we size hard costs versus in the lack of skills, right? We're seeing 10.5 million additional full-time equivalents needed over the next 5-year period. And 9.6 of those are security, right? 7.1% of those are data management. Oh, and by the way, COVID didn't make it any better, right? So as we look at the skills needed for COVID, what we're seeing is, once again, what will be the most important IT skills your organization needs to build, rebuild, or hire in the first wave of economic recovery, and which should technologies will be most important? Yeah, security, number one, IT operations, number two, right? It's not getting any better. But you'll notice, like, here is it interesting. When we start talking about top buying criteria in a type of crisis, what happens? We start thinking about number one, product reliability, right? How stable is this, right? Because we can't simply compensate for weaknesses and idiosyncrasies in our tools with people because we can't get enough people. So you'll see that this need for product reliability drops through in a lot of the other questions, really. For example, as it relates to people practices for security of the cloud, which of the following do you think is the most important? Finding complete solutions for your needs, number one. Finding solutions that are flexible and may be used for more than one purpose, number two, right? We're seeing this idea that complexity is the enemy of security, and we're seeing that we can't find enough people. We're finding that's habits, ramifications, and implications on the security tool sets that are selected. They need to be more reliable, and they need to address the complexity that we've created. So let's talk a little bit about breaches, right? The ugly B word, right? And as we look at this, we're struggling. Only 23% of the people that we surveyed said, that they haven't experienced a breach that required, significant extra resources to rectify in the last 10 years, right? 16% has seen one, 23% have seen two, 17% have seen three, 17% have seen 4, 5, or more, right? We're getting breached. It's a hard topic. Now, why? It's a potpourri of issues, right? These are self-reported reasons, right? So for your most recent breach of your IS environment, what was the predominant factor that resulted in the breach? Lack of security tools was number one. Number one, clearly, our security professionals are undermanned or under personnel. Advanced malware, 2, compromised credentials, number 3, misconfigurations, number 4. But it's interesting, taking a little bit of a double click here, because if you look at this by vertical market, it has some different ramifications, right? So if we look at lack of security tools, retail and wholesale, right? That's the number one issue for them. Education, is pretty up on the scale, but retail and wholesale, by far, they're screaming, we don't have enough tools. Advanced malware tends to be the problem more of governments, transportations, communications, utilities. Compromised credentials, that's the place for manufacturing. Manufacturing tends to deal with compromised credentials. That's the number one reason cited there. And misconfigurations, manufacturing and government. I'd be very interested. We are actually in the process of doing this revising this research now. Just spent the weekend updating that survey. We're going to be reissuing that in beginning of next year. I'm really curious and to see how these results change, if they change, given the experience we've had over the COVID. Now, as we ask them about, how are you protecting things, none of this is really kind of surprising. In thinking about security solutions for cloud architecture, when your organization first adopted cloud architecture, how did you choose to secure it, right? You're seeing a whole host of technology, from identity governance to privilege access management, key management, data loss prevention, right? We call this at IDC pervasive application edge defense, which is a presentation for another day and another time. But if you have a chance to take a look at that research, essentially what we're saying is, application security is not a thing. It's a collection of things that are all brought together in concert to be able to protect those applications. We also asked, looking for new securities. The several new securities ideas that become popular the past 2 years, which are more important, right? In protecting. Security analytics is becoming a very, very popular attribute, right? So how do we help find things? How do we eliminate noise? How do we prioritize alerts? How do we find things we could never really find? Runtime application protection, containerless, serverless security. We saw that in the Kubernetes data, multi-factor authentication, right? So there's a lot of things that the companies are looking at moving forward. So what does this all mean for security moving forward? I think it's funny, when you talk about the COVID and the next normal and the new normal. I think it's more of the same, just a lot more of the same, right? We had restrained budgets, right? It's even going to be more restrained, right? We need to spend more on security, but we need to spend more on security during a time in which, right, we have an economic slowdown, which makes a challenge. We had a limited cybersecurity talent pool. Now we have a more limited cybersecurity talent pool, right? As we're moving things aggressively to the cloud, as we're aggressively introducing digital transformation, as we're trying to flatten that curve, right? We sometimes are weighted down by the weight of our established processes and practices, right? We're having a completely expanding IT, estate and data ponds, right? That idea of multi-cloud. Every time we go to another cloud, right? That expanded cloud real estate only makes the problem worse. Cyber threats are unrelenting, right? And we're constantly seeing innovation. And just when we thought we saw it all, we see something more, right? Like in December of last year, right? Ransomware was the rage, and some quite clever cyber miscreant said, "Hey, as long as I'm going to deploy ransomware, let me exfiltrate all the data I can before I encrypt everything, so that I can not only offer you the reward to unencrypt all your data, but I can extort you and threaten to give all your data to your competitors or expose you publicly," right? That's the cyber threat. And of course, there's a new strategic imperative to adapt and be resilient, right? Anytime you see a time of crisis, the focus goes back in terms of resiliency, right? We saw this in years past, right? We always had focus on resiliency after every hurricane, right? Well, now as a global pandemic, and there's a focus on resiliency again. And with that, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate your time and your patience. I know that it's a busy time. You've got a lot of things to listen to. I'm just glad that you took time to spend it with IDC. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.